My family said I had abandoned my children for the American dream. They called me selfish and said I had chosen money over my own family. What nobody knew was that while people back in India were judging me, I was sleeping in a cramped basement in the United States, working until my hands bled and carrying a pain that even my children knew nothing about. For months, I smiled during video calls so they wouldn't worry, while my life was quietly falling apart behind the screen. But everything changed the day I discovered something about my wife and my children that no one had the courage to tell me. In that moment, I realized that the true cost of the American dream wasn't the money. It was what it was doing to my family. The night before I left, my son fell asleep holding my hand. He was 6 years old. His name is Arjun. He didn't know what was happening the next morning. I hadn't told him. I couldn't find the words. So I just sat there on the edge of his small bed in our one-room flat in Ahmedabad, listening to him breathe, watching his chest rise and fall in the yellow light coming through the curtain from the street outside. My wife Tarulata was in the other room, awake but not talking. She hadn't talked much in 3 days, not since I told her the plan was final. I was 31 years old. I had 11,000 rupees in my pocket, a debt of nearly 4 lakh hanging over my head, and a one-way ticket to Newark, New Jersey. I had a cousin there, Vikram, who said I could stay with him. He said he'd help me find work. He said America would change everything. I believed him. I had no other choice left to believe in. I want to explain what things looked like before I left, because I've noticed that people who were never there tend to fill in the gaps with their imagination, and their imagination is always wrong. We were not poor in the way that people picture when they hear the word. We had a home. The children wore clean clothes to school. We ate 2 meals a day without fail. But underneath all of that, things had been coming apart for years. I had been working at a small garment shop since I was 23. Good work, regular pay, not much, but steady. Then the owner's son took over the business, changed the whole system, and cut half the staff. I was one of them. That was 2017. I was 28. For the next 2 years, I went from job to job. Delivery driver, security guard, assistant at a printing press. None of it lasted more than a few months. Each time something ended, the debt grew a little more. We had taken a loan for my mother's surgery. Another small loan to fix the roof after the monsoon cracked it. Medical bills for Arjun's ear infection that came back 3 times in 1 year. None of it was extraordinary. None of it was reckless. It was just life adding up. By the time Arjun was 5 and my daughter Mira was 4, I had started waking up at 3 in the morning every night without knowing why. I would lie there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the building, the neighbor's television, water in the pipes, the dog barking somewhere below, and feel a kind of dread that I couldn't name. Not fear exactly, more like something slowly closing in. Tarulata knew. She never said it directly, but she knew. She had started taking on tailoring work at home, sitting at that small machine by the window until midnight, because the money I was bringing in wasn't reaching the end of the month anymore. She never complained. That was almost worse. Her silence felt heavier than any fight would have. Vikram called one evening in November. He had been in New Jersey for 6 years by then. Married, settled, working at a warehouse, and doing some side work cleaning offices. He wasn't rich. He was clear about that. But he was steady. He said he knew people who were hiring. Cash work, he said, under the table. He said I could sleep in his basement, save money, send some home, and come back in 2 years with enough to clear the debt and maybe start something of my own. 2 years. I kept repeating that to myself. 2 years and then come back. I told Tarulata that night. She listened without interrupting, which was her way. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "What happens to us while you're gone?" I said, "I'll send money every month. You won't have to do the tailoring anymore." She said, "That's not what I asked." I didn't have a better answer. I still don't. My father was the first to say I was making a mistake. He came to the flat 3 days before my flight. He sat in the plastic chair near the door, the way he always did when he was uncomfortable, and he said, "A man doesn't leave his wife and children for a dream. A man stays and finds a way." I wanted to ask him what way. I had been looking for that way for 2 years, but I didn't say anything. I was his son. You didn't argue. My older brother Deepak said less, but meant more. He didn't come to see me off. He called the morning of my departure and said, "Think carefully, Rajesh. Once you go, things change. People change." He said it like a warning. At the time I thought he was talking about me, only my mother hugged me without judgment. She held my face in her hands the way she used to when I was a child and said, "Write to me." She didn't say come back soon or don't go or we'll be fine. She just said, "Write to me," like she already understood that some distances are too big for phone calls. The morning I left, I woke Arjun up before dawn. I didn't mean to tell him. I just needed to look at him one more time in the way you look at something you're afraid to forget. But he woke up and looked at me with his sleepy eyes and asked, "Papa, where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going somewhere to make things better for us." He said, "Are you coming back?" I said, "Yes, very soon." He nodded like that made sense, then turned over and went back to sleep. Just like that. 6 years old, completely trusting. Mira didn't wake up. I stood in the doorway of their small room for what felt like a very long time. She was curled up with her knees pulled in, her hair across her face. I straightened her blanket without waking her. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. Tarulata came to the door to say goodbye. She didn't cry. She looked at me like she was memorizing my face. She said, "Be careful." That was all. I walked to the auto rickshaw that was waiting below. I did not look back up at the window. I knew if I saw her face there, I would not be able to go. Newark in January is a different world. Vikram picked me up from the airport in a car that smelled of fast food wrappers and air freshener. He was heavier than I remembered from the photos, wearing a down jacket that made him look twice his size. He shook my hand and said, "Welcome to America. Bye." He laughed. I tried to smile. The drive to his house took 45 minutes. Outside the window, everything was gray. The sky, the roads, the buildings, even the trees. I had seen cold before, but not this kind. This was a heavy cold, a cold that seemed to press down on everything. The house was a 2-story, in a quiet street, in a part of New Jersey that I would later learn most people drove through without stopping. Vikram's wife, Arti, opened the door. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She showed me to the basement. It was not what I had imagined. A single narrow bed against a concrete wall, a shelf, a small window near the ceiling that looked out at ground level. You could see shoes walking past on the pavement. A bare bulb overhead. The washer and dryer was separated from my space by a thin curtain. All night they ran cycles for the family upstairs. "It's temporary," Vikram said. "Just until you're on your feet." I thanked him. I set my bag down on the floor next to the bed. I sat down. I could still feel the weight of Arjun's hand in mine. I sat in that basement, in that gray January cold, with the sound of the dryer spinning above me, and for the first time since the whole thing began, I understood what I had actually done. Not the plan. Not the 2-year calculation. The actual thing. I had left. They were there. I was here. The bulb above me buzzed quietly in the silence. Outside the small window, someone walked past in boots, leaving footprints in the thin layer of snow. I didn't cry that night. The tears didn't come yet. There was something before tears, a heaviness that sat in the chest and made it hard to breathe properly. I sat with that for a long time. Then I lay down on that narrow bed, pulled the thin blanket over myself, and closed my eyes. The dryer kept spinning. The first job Vikram found me was washing dishes at an Indian restaurant in Edison. The owner was a Gujarati man named Hardship. He had been in America for 20 years and had the kind of confidence that comes from watching too many people need something from you. He looked me over when Vikram brought me in. The way you look at something you're considering buying and said, "Cash, 6 days a week. You don't miss a shift." I said yes before he finished the sentence. The kitchen started at 10 in the morning and didn't end until midnight, sometimes later on weekends. My station was at the back. 2 deep sinks, a sprayer hose, a plastic mat that was always wet, and a mountain of pans that never got smaller no matter how fast I worked. The steam from the dishwasher kept the back of the kitchen 20 degrees hotter than the front. In winter, I'd step outside for 2 minutes between loads just to breathe cold air and feel my face again. Nobody there called me by my name for the first 3 weeks. I was just new guy. Sometimes the other kitchen workers were mostly men from Gujarat and UP, and they had been there long enough to build a small hierarchy among themselves. Where you stood in that kitchen depended on how long you'd been there, who you knew, and how well you could disappear into the work without asking for anything. I learned to disappear quickly. The money worked out to about $9 an hour. Cash, no overtime, no breaks that anyone formally acknowledged. Vikram had explained before I started, the cash work was the only option for now, that I needed to be patient, that things would open up. I understood. I had no papers that allowed me to work legally. I had come on a visitor visa and stayed past what I was supposed to. That was the reality. I didn't talk about it. Nobody in that kitchen talked about it. It was just something everyone knew and nobody said. Hareshbhai had a habit of finding moments to remind you of your position. Not loudly. He was too careful for that. It came in small things. The way he would inspect a pan I'd washed and set it down without saying anything, then pick it up again and hand it back to me. The way he talked about the workers in his restaurant to suppliers and vendors in front of us, as if we were furniture that happened to understand Gujarati. Once, when a dinner service ran long and I had been standing for 14 hours straight, I asked if I could sit for 5 minutes. He looked at me for a moment and said, "You can sit when you go home." I didn't ask again. I want to be honest about something. The hardest part of those days was not the work itself. I had worked hard before. My body could handle it. The hardest part was the smallness, the way the day shrank you. You went in as a person with a name, a family, a history, and you came out 8, 10, 12 hours later as just a pair of hands that had completed their function. Nobody asked where you were from. Nobody asked about your children. You were useful in a specific and limited way, and outside of that, you were invisible. I learned to live inside that invisibility. After a while, I almost couldn't remember what it felt like to be seen. I called home every Sunday. That was the agreement Tarulata and I had made. Sunday evenings, her time. Which was Sunday night, my time. I would sit on the edge of my basement bed, shower taken, in clean clothes, the phone propped against the shelf so the camera could see my face, and I would perform. That is the only word I have for it now. Performance. I smiled. I said things like, "It's going well, and the weather is cold, but I'm managing, and tell me about the children." I made my voice light. I asked Arjun about school. I asked Meera about her drawings. She was always drawing things, birds mostly, with very serious faces. I told them I missed them, which was true, and that I would be home soon, which I was less sure of, but said anyway, because what else do you say to a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old who are looking at you through a small screen? Arjun always had questions. "Papa, why is it dark there when it's daytime here? Papa, did you eat dal today? Papa." There is a new boy in my class who pushed me. What should I do? Simple questions that broke something in me every time, because they were the questions a boy asks his father when the father is in the next room, not on a screen, not in another country. Meera would mostly sit close to the camera and look at me. She was quieter than Arjun, always had been. Sometimes she would hold up a drawing to show me. I would say, "Wah, Meera, that's so beautiful." She would nod very seriously, as if she was filing that information away. After they went to bed, Tarulata would stay on the call for a few more minutes. We would talk about practical things, how much I was sending, what bill needed paying, how her parents were. We never talked about how she was really doing. I don't know if that was her choice or mine, or just something that happened over time, the way certain conversations quietly stopped being possible. When the call ended, I would put the phone down and sit in the basement in the silence that always rushed in afterwards. The dryer usually running, the sound of Vikram's children on the floor above, the small window near the ceiling showing the darkened pavement, and I would feel it. The gap between the face I had just shown and whatever was actually happening inside me. It was not a dramatic feeling. It was dull and constant, like a low sound you stop consciously hearing, but that never actually goes away. By the 4th month, I understood the real structure of things in Vikram's house. He had helped me, yes. I didn't forget that. But help has different shapes, and I was learning the shape of his. I paid him rent, $500 a month for the basement. Artie made it clear early on, in that polite but firm way, that the kitchen was theirs. I could use the refrigerator for my things, kept on one designated shelf. I could use the bathroom between 7 and 8 in the morning before the children needed it. The living room was not exactly off limits, but it was also not for me. I understood without being told. I bought a small electric kettle for the basement and started making my tea there in the mornings. Vikram was not a cruel man. I want to be fair, but he was also not the cousin I had grown up imagining. He was a man who had his own pressures, his own mortgage, his own calculations. I was a line item in those calculations. He had done me a favor, and favors in that world came with a quiet accounting that never got written down anywhere. He found me extra work sometimes. A weekend cleaning job, moving furniture for someone he knew, painting a room in someone's house. He took a cut of what I was paid for those. Not much, $15 or $20 usually. I never said anything. He never explained it. It was just how things worked. I had heard before I left India that sometimes it was other Indians who made things hardest for new arrivals. I had thought that was bitterness talking. Now I understood it differently. It wasn't cruelty exactly, it was something more ordinary. People who had survived something difficult had built systems to survive it, and those systems didn't leave much room for softness. The calls from my family in India started changing around month 5. My brother Deepak called me on a Tuesday, not Sunday, just a random Tuesday afternoon, which meant something was wrong or he wanted something. He said he'd heard from someone in the neighborhood that Tarulata was struggling, that she had started the tailoring again, that she looked tired. I said she was fine. I was sending money every month. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Rajesh, people are talking." I asked what people were saying. He said, "They're saying you went there for yourself, that you left Tarulata to manage alone and the children are growing up without a father." I held the phone and said nothing. "I'm not saying that," he added. But he had said it. The way you can say something and then say you didn't say it. I told him I was doing this for the family, that every rupee I sent was accounted for, that I was living in a basement washing dishes 12 hours a day, and I hadn't bought myself a single thing in 5 months. He said, "Nobody knows that, Rajesh. All they see is that you left." That call lasted 7 minutes. After it ended, I sat on my bed in the basement for a long time, without moving. Nobody knows that. He was right. Nobody knew. I hadn't told anyone, not Tarulata, not my mother, not anyone back home. I had been so careful to make the calls cheerful, to say things were going fine, to protect them from the reality, that I had accidentally built a version of myself in their minds that was comfortable and thriving while they were struggling. I had been lying to protect them, and in doing so, I had become a man they were starting to resent. I went to work that evening. I stood at my sink and washed pans until midnight. The steam rose around me. My hands were raw. My feet ached. Nobody saw that either. I cried in the bathroom at the restaurant that night, briefly, with the tap running so no one would hear. Then I washed my face, dried it with paper towel, and went back to the sink. The worst discovery came 6 weeks later, in a way I hadn't expected. Tarulata mentioned on our Sunday call, quietly, toward the end, that Arjun had said something that week. She said it carefully, like she wasn't sure whether to tell me. She said he had come home from school and told her that his friend's father had asked him where his papa was. Arjun had said America, and the friend had said, "My mother says people who go to America forget their family." Arjun had come home and asked Tarulata, "Did Papa forget us?" She had told him no. Of course not, but she said it was quiet after that. The kind of quiet that a child carries differently than an adult. I asked her what she had told him. She said, "I told him you were working very hard for us." "Did he believe you?" She paused. "He's 7, Rajesh. He believes what I tell him. For now. For now." I understood what she meant by that. The window was not open forever. At some point, Arjun would be old enough to have his own version of the story, assembled from what he saw and what people told him and what he noticed in the silences. And if I wasn't there to fill it correctly, someone else would fill it for him. I lay down in the basement that night and stared at the ceiling above me. The bulb was off. Through the small window, I could see the yellow light from the street lamp outside. Somewhere above me, Vikram's children were laughing about something. I put my arm over my eyes. I thought about Arjun asking whether I had forgotten them. And I thought about how you can love someone completely, and still be so far away that they have to ask. It started with my hands. I noticed it first in December, about 8 months after I arrived. The skin on my knuckles had begun to crack from the constant hot water and industrial soap at the restaurant. Small splits, deep enough to bleed sometimes, that never fully healed because every morning I went back and put my hands in the water again. I wrapped them with bandage tape before shifts. By the end of the night, the tape would be soaked through. I didn't tell anyone. What was there to say? This is the work. You do it. But then the cracks started spreading, up my fingers, along the sides of my palms. The skin looked like dry earth at the end of summer. At night, lying in the basement, I would look at my hands in the dim light from the window and barely recognize them. They looked like an old man's hands. I was 32. I bought some cream from the Indian grocery on Oak Tree Road. It helped a little. Not enough. Then in January, my back went. Not suddenly. Gradually, the way these things happen when you've been ignoring the small warnings long enough. A dull ache that started at the base of my spine and spread upward through the day. By evening, it was difficult to stand straight. I started bending slightly to one side without realizing it. One of the other kitchen workers, a man from Surat named Bharat, who had been there 4 years, watched me one afternoon and said, "How long has your back been like that?" I said, "Like what?" He said, "You're walking like you're carrying something." I was carrying something. I had been carrying it for 8 months. I just hadn't noticed it had started to show. I missed 3 days of work in February. I didn't plan to. I woke up one morning and simply could not get up. My back had locked overnight. I lay on that narrow bed, unable to turn over, and stared at the ceiling. Vikram knocked on the basement door at 7:30, and I called out that I wasn't well. He opened the door, looked at me, and said, "You need to tell Haresh bye." I said I would call. He stood there for another moment, then said, "Don't take too long. He doesn't hold positions." Then he left for work. I lay there for 4 hours before I could sit up. The pain was deep and specific, right at the base of the spine, radiating down into my left leg. I knew what it was. I had seen my uncle with the same thing years ago. A disc. Rest, they had told him. Rest and careful movement. Rest. In a basement in New Jersey, 8 months behind on the original plan, with a debt that had only gone down slightly, 2 children growing up without me, and a job that did not hold positions. I called Harish by. He listened without sympathy and said, 3 days maximum. After that, I need someone at that sink. I said yes. I lay back down. Those 3 days were the worst of my time in America, not because of the pain, though the pain was real, because of what happens when there is nothing to do but think. I had kept myself sane by staying busy. 12-hour shifts, the walk home, sleep, the calls on Sunday. The structure had held something at bay that I hadn't named. Now, alone in the basement, with nothing but the sound of the house above me and the light changing in the small window, it came. I thought about the 2-year plan. 8 months in, and I had cleared perhaps 30% of the debt. At this rate, 2 years was already becoming 3, maybe 4. And then what? Go home to children who barely knew me? Go home to a marriage that had survived on weekly calls and careful performances? Go home to a family that had already decided the story of what I had done? I thought about Arjun's question, "Did Papa forget us?" I thought about Deepak's voice on the phone, "All they see is that you left." I thought about Tarulata saying for now, "The window of Arjun's trust still open, but not forever." On the second day, I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to remember the last time I had felt like myself. Not the self I performed on calls, not the self that showed up at the sink every day and disappeared into the steam. The self that existed before all of this? I couldn't find it. 8 months, and I had already lost the thread of who I was before I got on that plane. It frightened me more than the debt, more than the back. You can fix money, you can fix a disc, but when you lose the sense of your own person, when you look inside and find only exhaustion and performance, that is harder to fix. I lay down and put my face into the pillow. I didn't cry dramatically. It wasn't like that. It was more like something deflating, slow and quiet. A long breath going out that took everything with it. The call that Sunday was the most difficult one yet. I had planned to be cheerful. I always planned to be cheerful. But I was still in pain. I hadn't slept properly in 3 days, and my face in the camera, I could see it in the small preview window on my phone, looked hollowed out. I couldn't quite arrange it the right way. Arjun noticed immediately. He was 7, but he had always been perceptive, that child. He said, "Papa, are you sick?" I said, "A little cold, nothing serious." He said, "Your eyes look sad." I didn't know what to say to that. Tarulata stepped in quickly, distracted him with something, and he moved on. Children move on quickly when an adult smoothly changes the subject. But the moment stayed with me. The fact that he had seen it. That my 7-year-old could read my face better than I could hide it. After the call, I sat for a long time. Then I called my mother. I don't know why. I hadn't called her outside of the Sunday family calls since I'd left. But something about that evening, the pain, the 3 days of thinking, Arjun's face, made me dial her number. She picked up immediately, the way she always did, as if she'd been waiting. I said, Amma? She said, Rajesh, what happened? I said, nothing, I just wanted to hear your voice. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Rajesh, tell me the truth. How is it really? And something in that question, the simplicity of it, the fact that she wasn't asking to judge or to worry or to tell my father, just asking to know, broke through something I had been holding closed for 8 months. I told her. Not everything, not all at once, but some of it. The basement, the hands, the back, the hours, the way the money moved. In one direction, always. Every rupee counted before it was spent. The way Vikram's house worked, the Sunday calls, and how I held myself together during them and fell apart after. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said very quietly, My son, why didn't you tell us? I said, because I didn't want you to worry. She said, Rajesh, we were worrying anyway. We just didn't know what we were worrying about, so we filled in the gaps. That sentence hit me harder than I expected. We filled in the gaps. Of course they had. Of course. I had left a silence, and they had filled it with whatever story made sense to them. That I had gone for myself, that I was comfortable while they struggled, that I had made a choice and the choice was not them. I had protected them from the truth, and in doing so, I had handed them something worse. I went back to work after 3 days. Hareshbhai said nothing about my absence. I stood at the sink and put my hands in the water, and my back throbbed quietly, and I worked. But something had shifted, not outwardly. Everything looked the same, but inside, something had cracked open that I couldn't close again. I started noticing things I had numbed myself to. The way Hareshbhai's voice changed when he talked to the servers, all American-born, all given real consideration, compared to how he addressed the kitchen workers. The way Arti would look through me in the morning when I came upstairs to use the bathroom, not unkindly, just as if I were not quite fully present in the space. The way other men at the restaurant had the same careful blankness in their faces that I recognized because it was the same one I wore, the face of someone who has decided that feeling things at work is too expensive. I had become that. I had become a face at a sink, sending money home, performing happiness on Sundays, taking up the smallest possible amount of space in every room I entered, and then came the phone call that changed everything. It was my nephew, Deepak's son, 15 years old, who told me by accident. He called my number meaning to call his father, got confused, and started talking before he realized. He said something about the whole situation with Tarulata Babi and how Papa said it was getting difficult to watch. I said, what situation? He went quiet. Then he said, Uncle, I thought you knew. I said, knew what? Long pause. He told me. Tarulata had not been fine for months. The tailoring work had become too much. Her eyes were going, the close work in bad light, and she had started getting headaches that lasted for days. She had stopped telling me because I had enough to worry about. But Deepak knew. His wife knew. My mother, it turned out, had known for a few weeks. They had all quietly arranged among themselves to help. Meals brought over, the children watched on difficult days, and none of them had told me because, as Deepak had apparently said, Rajesh is managing his life there, no point troubling him, managing my life there. My wife was struggling in a way that had reached the whole family, and the family had decided together, without discussing it with me, that I didn't need to know, because they had decided I was living separately now, in a different category, the one who had left. I sat in the basement for a long time after that call. The small window above me was dark. The street outside was quiet. Somewhere in the walls, the pipes made a sound like breathing. I thought about Tarulata, sitting at that machine in the bad light, her eyes hurting, not telling me. I thought about her face on those Sunday calls, careful, composed, giving me the version she thought I needed. She had been performing too. We had both been performing. For 8 months, twice a week, separated by 8,000 miles. We had been protecting each other from the truth so carefully that we had each ended up completely alone inside it. I made a decision that night. I didn't sleep. I lay on the narrow bed and looked at the ceiling, and by the time the light in the small window shifted from black to gray, I had made up my mind. I was going to tell the truth. All of it. Not in pieces, not softened, not arranged for comfort. I was going to go home and sit in a room with my family and say what the last 8 months had actually been, and whatever happened after that, whatever they thought, whatever it cost, however long the conversation lasted, I was done carrying it alone. I booked the ticket the following week. It took almost everything I had saved beyond the next month's payment home. I didn't care. For the first time in 8 months, I felt something that wasn't exhaustion or dread or the low sound of sadness. I felt like I was finally about to do something real. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I thought about it on the long flight. Whether to call ahead, whether to give Tarulata a day to prepare, whether to warn my mother so she could warn Deepak. I decided against all of it. Not out of drama. I just knew that if I gave anyone time to prepare, we would end up having the prepared version of the conversation. The one where everyone already knows what they're going to say. I had been living in prepared versions of things for too long. The flight from Newark to Ahmedabad was 19 hours with a connection in Dubai. I sat in the middle seat both times and barely moved. My back ached through most of it. I didn't sleep. I watched the map on the screen in front of me, the small plane icon moving slowly across the blue, and I thought about what I was going to say. I didn't have a speech. I had decided not to plan one. Whatever came out when I saw them would be the right thing or it wouldn't, but it would at least be true. It was early morning when the auto rickshaw turned onto our street in Ahmedabad. January. Cool, but nothing like New Jersey. The air smelled of diesel and marigolds and something frying somewhere. The smell of home that you don't know you've been missing until it comes back all at once and your chest does something strange. The building looked the same. The paint on the stairwell still peeling in the same places. The neighbor's scooter still parked at the same angle against the wall. I climbed the stairs with my bag. My heart was doing something irregular. I stood outside the door for a moment. I knocked. Tarulata opened it. She was in her morning salwar, hair not yet done, and she looked at me with an expression I don't have a word for. Not surprise exactly, more like someone who has imagined something so many times that when it actually happens, it takes a second for them to believe it is real. She said, "Rajesh." I said, "Yes." She stood aside. I walked in. Arjun was at the small table eating breakfast. He looked up and went completely still. He had grown. Of course he had, 8 months, but you don't understand it until you see it. His face was longer. He was missing a tooth on the side that hadn't been missing when I left. He stared at me for a full 3 seconds. Then he got up from the chair so fast he knocked it backward, and he ran to me, and I caught him. And he was heavier than I remembered, solid and warm, and he put his face into my neck and held on. He didn't say anything for a while. Neither did I. Then he said, muffled against my shoulder, "You came back." I said, "I came back." Mira appeared from the other room. She stood in the doorway in her school uniform, already dressed, holding a notebook. She looked at me with those serious eyes, the same eyes she'd had since she was born, the ones that always seemed to be taking careful notes on the world. I crouched down and held out my arms. She walked to me slowly, deliberately, the way she did everything. Then she put her arms around my neck and held very tight, tighter than I expected from someone so small. She said quietly into my ear, "I made you a drawing. I was saving it." I said, "Show me." She went and got it. A house, a man standing in front of it. Stick figure children on either side. Careful crayon work. Very serious, the way she did everything. I held it for a long time. I called Deepak that afternoon. I asked him to come. I called my mother and father. I said I needed everyone together that evening at the flat. Deepak said, "Is everything all right?" I said, "I just need everyone to come." He came. My mother and father came. Deepak's wife. My mother sat near the window, the way she always did. My father took the plastic chair by the door. Deepak stood near the kitchen entrance with his arms crossed, cautious. Tarulata sat beside me. I looked at all of them. The people I had spent 8 months protecting from the truth. I said, "I want to tell you what the last 8 months were actually like." My father started to say something. I could see it coming, the preamble to an opinion. I said quietly, "Please, just let me finish. Then you can say whatever you want." He stopped. He nodded once, and I told them. I told them about the basement, the narrow bed next to the laundry, the curtain that separated my space from the machines, the small window near the ceiling where I watched shoes walk past on the pavement. I told them about the restaurant, about standing at the sink for 12 hours, about the hot water and the cracked hands and the bandage tape that was always soaked through by the end of the shift. I held up my hands so they could see. The skin was better now than it had been at its worst, but the marks were still there. I told them about Hardship, about the way he talked to the kitchen workers like we were tools he occasionally needed to maintain, about the day I asked to sit down for 5 minutes and he told me I could sit when I went home. I told them about Vikram. Not to condemn him, he had helped me, and that was real. But the full picture, the $500 a month for the basement, the designated refrigerator shelf, the cut he took from the extra work he found me, the way I had spent 8 months in someone else's house being carefully, politely reminded that it was someone else's house. I told them about the Sunday calls, how I would shower and put on clean clothes and arrange my face and perform for them. How I said it's going fine and the cold is manageable and tell me about the children. And how the moment the call ended, I would sit in the basement with the silence and feel the distance between what I had just shown them and what was actually true. I looked at Tarulata when I said this part. She was looking at the floor. She already knew some of it. Since the night I called my mother, we had begun to dismantle the performances, slowly in pieces. But hearing it said out loud, in a room with everyone present, I could see it landing differently. I told them about Arjun's question, "Did Papa forget us?" I said that sentence, and my voice did something I couldn't control, and I stopped for a moment. The room was very quiet. I told them about the 3 days when my back gave out, about lying in the basement, unable to get up, about the ceiling above me, and the thought that I had lost the thread of who I was before any of this began. I told them about the phone call with my mother, about finally saying some of the truth, and her saying we filled in the gaps, and me understanding, for the first time, what my silence had cost. I told them about Deepak's son calling by mistake, about finding out that Tarulata had been struggling for months, that her eyes were going from the tailoring in bad light, that the whole family had arranged quietly to help her without telling me because they had placed me in a different category, the one who had left. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a long time. My father spoke first. He is not a man who apologizes easily. I have never heard him say I was wrong in those exact words. Not to me, not to anyone, as far as I know. He sat in the plastic chair by the door, and he looked at his hands, and then he looked at me. He said, "I didn't know it was like that." I said, "I know, I didn't tell you." He said, "I said things, about you leaving, about a man staying and finding a way." I said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know what you were staying and finding a way inside of." That was as close to an apology as he was capable of. I understood that. I didn't need the exact words. I needed him to see it, and he was seeing it. Deepak uncrossed his arms. He sat down on the floor near the table, the way he used to when we were boys, and there weren't enough chairs. He looked older than he had 8 months ago. Or maybe I was just seeing him differently now. He said, "I told people you went for yourself." I said, "I know." He said, "I was angry. When you left, I was angry, and I didn't say it to you, so I said it to other people." I asked him why he was angry. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I wanted to be the one to fix things, and I couldn't, and you found a way that I hadn't thought of, and then I was gone, not physically. But I wasn't helping Tarulata the way I should have been, so it was easier to make you the problem." I had not expected that, the honesty of it. I looked at my brother and felt something shift between us. The weight of an old rivalry or old score that neither of us had ever named directly, but that had been sitting there for years. I said, "You helped her when I couldn't see it. You brought food. You watched the children." He shrugged, looked away. It wasn't enough. It was something. My mother had not spoken yet. I looked at her by the window. She was watching me with an expression that was hard to read. Not hard because it was complex, but because it contained too many things at once. Love and grief and something like guilt and something like pride, all at the same time. I said, "Amma, you knew some of it, from our call." She nodded. I said, "Why didn't you tell the others?" She said, "You asked me not to. That night on the phone before we hung up, you asked me not to say anything yet. You said you needed to think." I had forgotten that. I had said it automatically, still protecting, still managing. And she had honored it, kept my secret, even when keeping it cost her something. I said, "I'm sorry I made you carry that." She shook her head. Don't apologize to me. I'm your mother. That's not carrying. That's just loving you. I put my face in my hands for a moment. Not crying, exactly, something quieter than that. Tarulata and I talked after everyone left, late into the night, after the children were asleep. We sat in the kitchen with the light above us, and we said the things we had both been saving for 8 months. She told me about the headaches, about the tailoring in bad light, the way her vision blurred by evening, about the days when she felt completely alone in a way that had nothing to do with me being gone, because women can be alone in a room full of family. About the time she had started to type something honest in a message to me and then deleted it because she thought I had enough. I told her about the Sunday calls, about washing my face after them and lying on the bed in the basement and feeling the distance like a physical thing. She said, "I knew you weren't telling me everything." I said, "I knew you weren't either." We looked at each other across the small kitchen table. She said, "We were both trying to protect each other." I said, "We should have just talked." She said, "Yes, it sounds simple. It is simple. Most true things are." I stayed for 3 weeks. I had told Haresh Bhai I needed time. He found someone else for the sink, which was fine, which was expected. I would figure out the rest later. For 3 weeks, I was just there. I took Arjun to school in the morning. I walked beside him on the narrow pavement, his backpack bouncing, and he talked the whole way. About his teacher, about his friend, whose father had asked him where his papa was, about football, about a bird he had seen on the roof. I listened to every word. I did not think about the debt or the plan or what came next. I just listened. I took Mira to get new crayons. She stood in front of the display for a long time, very seriously, the way she did everything, selecting colors with great deliberation. She got a dark blue and a yellow and a specific shade of green she approved of after holding it up to the light. I went with Tarulata to the eye doctor. Her vision had deteriorated more than either of us had known. She needed glasses. We sat in the waiting room together, and it felt ordinary and enormous at the same time. The simple fact of being in a room together, dealing with something together, not through a screen. Some evenings, my mother came over. She would make tea and sit in the kitchen, and we would talk. Really talk, not perform. My father came twice. He sat in the plastic chair both times. He didn't say much, but he stayed. Deepak came one afternoon when Tarulata took the children to her mother's. Just the two of us. We sat on the balcony and drank chai and talked for 3 hours. About growing up. About the ways we had competed without naming it. About the things our father had said to each of us that had lodged somewhere deep and shaped us without us realizing. It was the longest real conversation we had ever had. On my last evening, I sat on the floor of the children's room after they fell asleep. Same as the night before I left. The same yellow light from the street through the curtain. The same sound of the building around us. But everything was different. Arjun was asleep on his side, facing the wall. He had grown 2 centimeters since I left. His feet reached further down the bed. Mira was on her back with her arms out, the way she always slept, completely open to the world even in sleep. On the wall above her bed, she had taped the drawing she had saved for me. The house, the man, the children on either side. I sat there for a long time. I am 39 years old now. 8 years have passed since I first went to New Jersey. I went back after those 3 weeks. I had to. The debt wasn't gone. The plan wasn't finished. But things were different the second time. I had told the truth, and the truth had not destroyed anything. It had actually made things more solid somehow, like a structure that was finally built on real ground instead of performance. The Sunday calls changed. Tarulata and I stopped performing. Sometimes the calls were difficult. She would tell me something hard, I would tell her something hard, and we would sit with it together across the distance instead of protecting each other from it. It was worse in some ways, and much, much better. Deepak told the neighbors what I was actually doing. Not loudly, not as an announcement, just corrected the story quietly when it came up. The talk changed. My father called me one evening, unprompted, just to ask how I was. Not how the plan was going, not about the money, how I was. It was a short call. It mattered more than most long ones. I came home for good after 3 more years, not the original 2-year plan. 3 more years because that's how long it took. I came home with the debt cleared, something saved, and a relationship with my wife and children that had been cracked open and rebuilt more honestly than it had ever been before. Arjun is 15 now. He knows the whole story. He asked me about it last year, sat me down the way teenagers do when they've decided to have a serious conversation, and said, "Papa, I want to know what it was really like." I told him, all of it. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "It sounds very lonely." I said, "It was." He said, "Why didn't you tell us?" I said, "Because I loved you, and I didn't want you to hurt." He thought about that. Then he said, "But we hurt anyway. We just didn't know why." 15 years old, and he understood it better than I had at 31. Mira is 14. She still draws. Birds mostly, still with the serious faces. She gave me one last month. A man standing in a field, looking up at the sky. No house this time, no children beside him, just the man and the open sky above. I asked her what it meant. She said, "I don't know, it just felt like you." I put it on the wall of our bedroom. I look at it sometimes in the morning, before the day starts. I've thought about why I wanted to write this down. To tell this to strangers in detail, in a language some of you will read far from home. I think it's because I spent 8 years watching men like me, Indian men mostly, but not only, carry versions of this story in silence. Men who sent money home every month and smiled on video calls and held themselves together with the specific discipline of someone who has decided that falling apart is not an option. Men who were called selfish by the people they were sacrificing for, because sacrifice done in silence looks from the outside exactly like absence. I want to say this clearly. The silence does not protect anyone. I thought I was protecting my family by carrying it alone. I was actually just making sure we were all alone together, which is a particular kind of loneliness that is worse than being alone by yourself. Tell someone. Not everyone, not immediately, but find one person and tell them what it's actually like. Your mother, your wife, your brother, if you have the kind of brother who can hear it. Someone. The distance is real. The sacrifice is real. The loneliness is real. None of it becomes less real by performing the opposite on a Sunday call. And to anyone reading this who has someone in another country, someone sending money, someone calling every week with a smile that maybe looks a little too arranged, please consider that you might not know the whole story. The gap between what someone shows you and what they are living can be very wide. Wide enough for years of pain to live inside it without you ever knowing it was there. Ask them, not how's it going. Ask them, how is it really? And then wait. Give them enough silence to tell the truth into. That silence might be the most important thing you give them. Tarulata is beside me as I write this. Arjun is sleeping in the next room. Mira too. The flat is quiet. Ahmedabad, outside the window, is doing what it always does at this hour. The sound of the city settling into night, the dogs somewhere below, the last auto rickshaw on the street. I am home. I know what that means now in a way I didn't before I left. Home is not a place that stays the same while you're gone. It changes. The people in it change. The children grow teeth and lose them and grow new ones. The light shifts. The drawings on the wall get replaced by new ones. You have to come back to it honestly. Not to the version you left, to the version that is actually there. That took me 8 years to understand. I don't regret going. I don't regret coming back. I regret the silence, all those months of careful performance, of protected Sunday calls, of carrying everything alone, because I thought that was what strength looked like. Strength doesn't look like that. Strength is saying this is what it's actually like to someone who loves you, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid.